Hi, today I'd like to go over how to create a map to use for laser burning and etching via a program like Lightburn or another program. We're going to accomplish this by using Maperitive, which is a free program available from maperitive.net, and data from OpenStreetMaps.org. Maperitive will allow us to reformat that data and export it into an SVG, which can then be cleaned up fairly simply in a program like Affinity Designer. So to get started, we're going to assume that you've already gone to maperitive.net and downloaded the newest version and got it installed. Maperitive uses rendering rules to determine how it's going to display the map and what that exported map is going to look like. So I have created some custom rules that will make a black and white map that is excellent for etching and very simple to edit in a program like Affinity. So to get started, assuming you already have Maperitive installed and the rules, which are available from the GitHub repo below, installed into Maperitive, you will open Maperitive and basically you'll find the area that you want to make a map of. Today we're going to do Punxsutawney, Pennsylvania, because it's been cold here and I'm resenting Punxsutawney Phil these days. So all you gotta do is find the area you want and zoom into a level that's reasonable. You want to make sure you have all of the image that you want without too much extra data, because the more data you get, the slower the processes are going to happen in Affinity later while we're trying to clean this up. So I want to be able to make sure that I'm going to get the whole Punxsutawney area here. This looks like a good zoom level. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to download this data by going to Map, Download OSM Data. And it runs a task, it downloads it, and I'm going to make myself disappear here for a moment, but I can show you right over in this area, down here in the corner, it says Web Map and OSM file. We want to turn off the web map now that we've downloaded the data, because the rendering rules only apply to the OSM files that have been downloaded, not to the web data. So now that we have the data, or like the area defined and downloaded, we'll go to Map, switch to Rules, and we're going to use the laser rule. This is the new one that I would have created that's in my repository, and the repository has instructions for how to install it in Maperitive once Maperitive is on your computer. So you notice when I change it to laser, we have the roads are now black, different sizes depending on what size of a road it is. The road names are there if you choose to use them later. The railroads are green. We're going to have to process those a little bit. Railroads can be a bit of a pain, and you'll see why in a few minutes. And we have the rivers are blue. Normally what I'll do in the laser is I'll etch the roads just with the standard filled etch, and I like to put the rivers on a separate layer so that they just are two score lines side by side. The railroads I like to make dashed lines, but we have them highlighted in green here, and we can change that. That way they become a different layer for Affinity processing. And we can get them converted the way we want, then change them black in Affinity, and merge them with the roads so that when I go into Lightburn, everything looks right. So at this point, we're ready to export the SVG from Maperitive. So I'm just going to go Tools, Export to SVG for Inkscape. And that's already done. You'll notice in Maperitive there's this command line window down here that shows you what's going on. And you can actually type some commands in here to do some things that you can't actually do in the interface. And this is telling me that it exported the SVG to C, Program Files, Maperitive, output/output.svg. This is always the file name it's going to output to by default. So we're now done in Maperitive, and we have an SVG where we know it is. So I'm going to close Maperitive. Now that we have that exported, we're going to go into Affinity Designer. One thing to note here is in Maperitive, it's exporting all lines and strokes. So you're getting a whole bunch of little curves that are put together and stacked on top of each other to make your roads. which is very similar to how Google Maps does things and any other mapping program. We want to get those to be a single shape that's outlined. It's like an actual shape, not just lines, because if you import all those lines into Lightburn, it's going to throw a hissy fit, and you will get nothing like what you want. So, with that noted, I'm going to go ahead and open up Affinity Designer, and in it, we're going to open that SVG file. So here you'll note we're in C, Program Files, Maperitive, and Output. And here's our output.svg that was just created. When I open that file, you'll see that the white background is the size of what my screen was in Maperitive. But if I zoom out, I have a whole lot of other data that we're going to have to get rid of. That's pretty simple. We'll get to that towards the end of this process in Affinity. First thing we want to do is get rid of some layers that are really useless. So the map background is literally, if I turn it on and off, it's just a white background. We don't need that. Also, I don't want, layer 799 is always all the text. I don't want text on my map, so I'm going to turn that off. If you do want the text on there, you can leave it on, but then you're going to have to figure out how to edit that text yourself to get it the right colors, shapes, locations, and stuff like that. It's just a massive hassle, so I'm not doing that. The map decorations are the latitude and longitude lines, as well as the scale marker in the bottom corner and the copyright information. So I don't need that. I'm going to delete that layer. Dang it. And the map frame is literally just a line around the outside. I'm going to delete that as well. So now what we're left with is the text and the line artwork. Well, for this example, I'm going to delete the text because, again, I don't want to do anything with it. If you choose to do something with it, that's up to you. You'll have to figure that out. So if I open up the line artwork layer, you'll see that I have railways. I have a bunch of different entries for highways. I have the rivers, streams, and such. If I had bodies of water like ponds, there would be another layer here called areas, I believe it is, and it would have the ponds in there as white objects with red outlines, because typically I like to cut out my ponds and have a blue board behind them so they pop out as like blue. Again, if those are there, they're just shapes. You can do with them what you want, but the rest of this would apply for how to process those. So first I want to process all my highways, since those are usually what you're looking for most in the map. So I'm going to turn off all my railroads. And I have to lean a little bit here because my screen's looking small. And I want to turn off my rivers and my streams. Okay. And now I want to select all of these groups that have the word highway on them. So I'm just going to click on the first one, hold down Control, and click on all of the highways. Now you'll notice these are groups. If you expand these groups, you'll see there's subgroups inside of those and curves inside of those. We want to get to the point where we have all of the curves selected, because it's going to make the rest of this process a lot easier. There's some convenient things that Affinity gives with this. So if I hit Control-Shift-G, I'm going to ungroup all of these groups that I have. Oh, I missed one. But I'm going to ungroup all these groups that I have selected. And whatever's in them is going to remain selected. That's a key. That's really important. So if I Control-Shift-G to ungroup, now you'll see they turned into those subgroups, but they're still groups. See that little arrow and it says it's a group? I'm going to hit Control-Shift-G again, and now you see I got a whole bunch of curves to make up all the roads. Well, these curves are simply lines with different stroke widths. Again, we want to make them into shapes that we can weld together so that Lightburn will know how to display them properly, because Lightburn and Affinity display things significantly differently. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to expand the stroke on these, which will turn them from straight lines into shapes of what their stroke is. So with all of these selected, I haven't touched anything else. I'm going to go Layer, Expand Stroke. Now depending on your computer, this will take a while. And this is where you may have to break these up into a couple steps and do like chunks at a time and then weld those together. The welding part we're going to get to in a moment. I happen to have a fairly high-end PC at this point, so I can do this all in one step. It just takes a few seconds. Okay, now I'm just going to check and see if I can move things. Okay, good. I can move things. That means that's done. I'm going to undo that move. Now these are all shapes instead of lines. To weld them together so they become one big shape, all I have to do is hit the plus button up here, and it's going to weld everything that overlaps into one shape. So I hit that. We're adding all the things together. Now you can see I have one curve left that I'm going to rename to roads. So now I know, if I zoom out, this is one large shape called roads. Now I'm going to repeat that process for the rivers and streams. I'm going to tie them together because I don't care if it's a river or a stream. So I'm going to turn off my roads and turn on my rivers and streams. I'm going to highlight both of those. Control-Shift-G to ungroup again. And Control-Shift-G to ungroup that again. Now I got the curves. I'm going to layer, expand stroke, plus. Now my rivers are all one set of curves. I'm going to rename rivers. Now the railway, like I said, it can be a bit of a pain. I'm going to turn off the rivers and turn on the railway. And the reason this can be a pain is because the railroads will put a whole bunch of little similar shapes together. The overall process works, but a lot of times there's little bits that you end up having to delete. So I'm going to expand the railroads. Well, actually, sorry, let me take that back. I got to highlight all of them, turn them all on. You'll see that filled in some gaps that there were. I'm going to do Control-Shift-G to ungroup, Control-Shift-G again to ungroup. Now I want to get them put together in this Document Explorer over here. So I'm going to do Control-G to group them, and then Control-Shift-G again, just so now they're all in one list here. They're not broken up with other things in between them. Now I have to go through these and decide which ones I want to keep. And I can do that by turning them on and off. Okay, so turning this one on and off. And if I deselect, okay, that would remove something. This would remove something over here. That one's one that looks like I can get. There's a tiny little area right here that one is. Highlighting them actually will show you where, should show you where they are. So this one's like right there. And I can turn it on and off. Yes, I need it. That one's up there on the top. Okay, this one I don't need. You'll see this one's right over here. I don't really, sorry, this one. I'm going to delete that one because I don't want it. That one, if I turn on and off, I'm not really losing anything, so I'm going to delete it. Same for this one. That looks like there's a railway yard in this area right here, so there's a lot of tracks together there. And I really want it to just be one line. So I really want to get these to the point where they make sense. Okay, I can delete that one. This is going to take another couple minutes. Okay, I can delete that one, that one, that one, and that one, and that one, and that one, and that one. Okay, so that area is a lot cleaner now. That looks good. We want to we want to keep that one. Where is this one at? Oh, it's a tiny little thing right there. I can't even see if it's making a difference. I'm going to zoom in. Okay, there is another line under it apparently, so I can get rid of it. And I'm going to get rid of that one. Now we're back to the big curve. I'm guessing we want to keep... Oh, nope, that's a duplicate as well. No, okay, it's not because it covered here. I'm going to undo that. This next one is a portion, so that one I think I can delete. No, can't really get rid of it either because it has this down here. All right, that one we don't want to get rid of. That one we can keep. And like I said, the railroads are tedious, so I apologize for this part of the video. That's just the way it goes. And this is what goes into cleaning this data up. Okay, that's that whole lower piece. And that's the upper piece. Okay, so that's pretty much the railroads we want to keep. So now I'm going to highlight those all. Now, like I said, I like to make the railroads dashed lines. I don't want them to be solid lines because then they just look like roads. So with all of these together, I'm going to hit Control G to group them again so I can change their fill and stroke together. I want to change these to have a black stroke, and we'll make it like, let's say we make it 2 point, or let's make it 3 point. Or no, we'll go 5. We'll have to see in a minute. Well, let's turn on the roads and see what that looks like compared to the roads. Okay, so the railroads should be, in my opinion, about as thick as a highway because they're pretty predominant. So I want to make that a little thicker than even. So I'm trying to make this maybe 7 or 8. And the font or the line size that you use will also depend on the scale of your map and everything, obviously. So if I turn on the roads and look at, okay, so that looks pretty good for the size of the lines. Now I'm going to change this to dashed lines instead of solid lines. And you can change these numbers at the bottom to change the size of the dashes. So I want to have some larger dashes that are spaced further apart. You can play around with these numbers. I don't know what they're actually called, but they work on the spacing of the dashes and what the pattern is and all. I think that looks pretty good how it is. I'm going to turn on the roads. Okay, yeah, now you can see the railroads running right next to the road. That looks pretty good. And if I turn the rivers on, oh, I missed a stream. I missed a stream. So I got to ungroup this stream twice and then add it to the rivers and rename that to rivers again. And with the rivers, we're going to change the fill to blue. Hang on, I got a swatch here. All right. Turn off the stroke on the rivers. Okay, so now we have the blue rivers, the dashed railroads, and the completed highways. Oh, the railroads we have to finish, I'm sorry, because right now they're a group of shapes. All right, we're going to ungroup them again now. So with this group highlighted, I'm just going to do Control-Shift-G. With all the curves, now I'm going to expand the stroke, and this is going to expand the stroke as the dashes. So if I go to Layer, Expand Stroke, you'll see it didn't really look like anything changed over here. I'm going to add those all together again, and now this is railroad. Okay, so now the railroads and the roads are both black, which is how I usually do it, so those etch normally. And then the rivers, like I said, I put those on a different layer so that I can etch those as 2 lines for the banks of the river without actually filling them in and making them look like another road. Okay, so now we have the map in the state of what I would take into Lightburn to burn, but we have way more data here than we need. So this is where we have to create a mask layer that will allow us to cut out just what we want. So I'm going to change the dimensions on this to millimeters, even though I typically work in millimeters, but I'm going to do the next step in inches, which will show you another trick you can do in Affinity. So I want to create a rectangle. Say I want this to be an 8 by 10, or we'll say really a 10 by 8 because we want a landscape for the city because Punxsutawney is laid out in more of a horizontal orientation. I'm going to just create a new rectangle. I'm going to change the width to 10, but since I want this in inches, even though my document's in millimeters, I can just type the quotes to make it inches. And then I want to make it height of 8 inches. So I want a 10 by 8. So this square is the proportions of an 8 by 10. I am going to turn off I'm going to convert it to curves, and I want to turn off the fill, and I want to turn on a stroke. We'll just make it black and solid. Okay, so now we have a solid black square that's 8 by 10. I can resize this. If I hold down Shift, it'll keep the proportions. So say I just want to get a good chunk of Punxsutawney here. And I'll move it. So now that square is what we're going to, or that rectangle I should say, is what we're planning to burn. So now, to make this a mask, I want to zoom out, way out, and create another big square that's way larger than everything. Oh, that just selected everything. That's not what I want to do. I want to create another square. So create a square larger than everything else. Okay, so a rectangle. So now I have a rectangle. I want to convert it to curves again. This is the smaller one. So I want to put the smaller one above the bigger one. And that's because in Affinity Designer, we're going to subtract the small one from the big one, which will give us basically a big rectangle with a little rectangle taken out of it. And the big rectangle is going to be everything that's not in our map. In Affinity, if you have one layer on top of another, or one shape on top of another, and you select them both and hit the minus, it's going to subtract the top, whatever the top layer is here, from the bottom layer. And that's what we want, because the bottom layer now is the big one. The top layer is the small one. We want the small one removed from the big one. So hit minus. And we now have our mask layer. So I'm going to name this mask. So now I have one mask, but I have 3 layers I have to clean up. Roads, rivers, and railroads. So I'm going to make 3 copies of this mask layer. I have one already. I'm going to do Control-C, Control-V, and Control-V. So now I have 3 mask layers. With the top mask layer selected, I'm going to pick roads. I want to go to shapes here instead. Okay, so you'll see now I have the mask layer on top and the roads on the bottom. If I hit subtract now, it's going to subtract the mask layer, which is the big thing, from the roads, leaving me only what I want. So I'm going to hit minus here. And this will take a few seconds because there's a lot of roads. Let that run there. Okay, so now you see all the superfluous roads disappeared. Now I'm going to take the next mask layer and the rivers and do the same thing. This should go a lot faster. And then I'm going to do the last mask layer and the railroads and subtract those. And now I'm just left with the perfect shape of the roads, the railroads, and the rivers. So I'm ready to copy this into a new document so we don't have all this extra printing space around there. I'm going to take the roads, the rivers, and the railroads, highlight them. So hold down Shift and click on railroads, got them all highlighted. I'm going to hit Control-C. Now I'm going to do File, New from Clipboard. And there you'll see I have an 8x10 document. Again, I'll change this to millimeters. But this is an 8x10 document that is ready to export for interrupt this video to correct ourselves. I noticed that there's one part I missed in the finalization of the SVG and Affinity. So luckily I hadn't closed this yet. This is where we're at the point that we have the roads, the rivers, and the railroad in separate layers. A couple things here. First of all, a lot of times the rivers will overlap the roads. And so you could say, okay, well, I'm going to put the roads on top of the rivers, and we should be good, because now it's going to be black. Well, the problem there is in Lightburn, it's going to etch this as a road, then it's also going to cut it, like, lines through it as the river as well. So you're going to get spots that are double burned. You don't really want that. Additionally, the railroads, as you can see here, are slightly overlapping the roads. So we're going to weld those shapes together. So the railroads and the roads will just be one black shape, period. So first, to deal with the rivers and the roads overlapping where there are bridges, make a new copy of the roads, Control-C, Control-V, then just highlight one of the roads, select the river, and do a minus. And you'll see now the rivers no longer, if I turn off the roads, the rivers now have breaks where the roads are. That's fairly important because otherwise you're going to get dual burns in spots, and it will be noticeable whether you think it will or not. Then the other thing we're going to do is we're just going to take the railroads and the roads, and we're going to add those together with the plus. That way they're welded together completely too. And I'll just rename this roads again. So now we have just the roads and the rivers layers, and we can still export this now. So one other thing that you might want to put a compass rose in, you might want to put the town names, stuff like that. So say we want to put the name Punxsutawney down here. What I might do there is take my font tool. I'm just going to put, we'll just use Arial. I'm going to type in Punxsutawney. Yay. I'm going to select all of that and scale it up significantly so you can actually see it. And obviously you'd pick a different font or whatever. So say that's what you want there. You could do this, you could either do a rectangle behind it or you could do a knockout. In this case, we're going to try to do a knockout, which is where you go around the letters evenly without it being a perfect shape. So what we're going to do now is with this Punxsutawney PA here, we're going to convert that to curves. Then we're going to controls, then that creates it, that turns it into a group. We want to, just like before, we want to ungroup this with Control-Shift-G. And then we want to add all those things together. So we're going to hit the plus. So now this is the name. We want to copy this shape, Control-C, Control-V. And then on one of the copies, it doesn't really matter which one, we want to use the contour tool. So if I click on the contour tool, put it on Punxsutawney and adjust it, you'll see that it's making a halo around the name. At this point, I'm going to say that's what I want. I'm going to hit Bake Appearance. And now that is the halo, I'll call it. And really, since the roads are the only thing that it crosses over, it doesn't cross the rivers, we take that one copy of the halo and select the road and subtract that. And now you're left with the Punxsutawney shape neatly in the roads. You could do that exact same thing with a rectangle if you want to be a nice even rectangle. You could put borders on that if you want. With the compass rose, what I would typically do, I have a compass rose shape. I'm not going to bother getting that out right now. But I might find an area that's less populous here and say I want my compass rose to be about like that. I'll just knock that circle out in the same way. Create a circle, convert to curves, select the roads, and subtract. So now I have a nice even circle to put the compass rose in with the right clear spots around it. So on that note, back to our regularly scheduled programming. So if I go File, Export, I have a preset here for SVG for Lightburn. It's really that it's 96 dpi is important. We're not rasterizing anything, and the other settings are pretty standard. So I'm going to go ahead and hit Export. I'm going to save this to my desktop to a map demo folder. We're going to call this punxsy.svg. And that's it. We're now done. If I go into Lightburn at this point, I can import that file. So I'll import, I'm going to go to my desktop, map demo, and there's punxsy.svg. You see that it imported. We have our rivers on a layer to be outlined. We have our roads and our railroad on the black layer. And we are good to go. That is the overall process. Now you just paste this wherever you want, or like move it wherever you want it, and you're ready to go.